What does failing your way to success mean? It's quite common for people wanting to succeed at something, and that's perfectly normal. However, from time to time, we find ourselves struggling in the same way as when you first started off or when you were just starting out in your career. You might feel like you're failing, but looking back at how far you've come will give you a sense of satisfaction. Sometimes, the more you try to escape your failures, the harder they come back. Sometimes, it seems like we're trying to avoid failing at all costs. That's why what failure really means is dependent on who you ask. Luckily for you, Manna member, this video goes on to discuss how we get stuck when we want something so much that we don't realize what success actually looks like, and what does failing your way to success mean. Failure is a crucial ingredient for success. Failure is something we all experience, and more often than not, we are terrified of even considering the possibility of failure. Failure is seen as a barrier to achievement in our society. We've been taught to shun failure since we were children. We strive for, as in school, in order to gain admission to a reputable institution or a decent job offer after graduation. We try to avoid earning an F as much as possible because it means we failed at something. In fact, F is the only letter grade in the letter grading system that matches the first letter of what it stands for: failure. The idea that failure is bad for us becomes imprinted in our minds in this subtle way, and we want to avoid it. We view failure as a negative experience rather than a natural part of life. Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, the two world-renowned psychologists who won the Nobel Prize for their work, explain why we are so afraid of failure. They discovered that the negative impact of a defeat is twice as strong as the positive impact of a win. This amazing finding demonstrates the far bigger negative impact of a loss on us as individuals than the impact of a win. As a result, it explains why we would go to great efforts to avoid losing or failing. What's noteworthy is that two of our century's most valuable software companies, both worth billions of dollars, have radically different attitude about failure. They tolerate and embrace it. Both Jack Ma and Jeff Bezos think that failure is a necessary part of the learning process. Ma has always been open about his shortcomings, most recently recounting them in an interview at the World Economic Forum, such as not receiving a position at KFC when 24 individuals applied and 23 were hired, or failing to land a job as a hotel server while his relative did, or failing to get into Harvard despite applying 10 times. He claims that all of these setbacks prepared him for his career as a CEO. On the other side, Jeff Bezos emphasizes that being tolerant of failure is a key element of Amazon's culture and is responsible for the company's big triumphs. In an article published by Business Insider, Bezos claims that if you don't innovate, you're throwing money away. Failure comes hand in hand with creation, he wrote in a letter to shareholders. It's not a choice. We recognize this and believe in failing quickly and iterating until we achieve success. This reminds us that while failure can be painful and we as a society have developed an aversion to it, it can also help us reach our full potential. However, we must first adjust our attitude about failure. Instead of seeing it as a hindrance to achievement, we should see it as a tool for success, one that allows us to fine-tune our path and learn what works and what doesn't. In this sense, we might regard it as a natural element of our lives, inventiveness, rather than as a threat to life. What a flop! You're incapable of doing this? It was a blow to my ego every time I failed at something. A failure indicates that I'm unworthy. A failure indicates that I lack the necessary skills. When I failed, it meant that someone else had outperformed me. I realized that failing isn't so horrible after all. It's an essential stepping stone to achieving success in life. This is due to the fact that most people have not failed enough times in their lives. We are constantly in our comfort zones. Consider the last time you pushed yourself to the brink of failure. We despise failure because it lowers our self-esteem. We believe that if we fail, others will notice and judge us. We have evolved to fear failure like the plague. If we had failed 100,000 years ago, we would have actually been eaten. This feature was passed down through the generations, allowing us to live for thousands of years. Our reptilian brains now hold on to this attribute and avoid risk, despite the fact that it no longer serves us. The dangers we take will not kill us 99% of the time. The greatest people in history were all failures. The most well-known instance is, "I have not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work." This was once said by Thomas Edison. Many others who went on to achieve great things also failed numerous times. Steve Jobs, J.K. Rowling, Walt Disney, and Stephen King were all failures in their fields. They persevered and didn't see failure as something they were. Rather, failure was something that occurred to them. How can we improve our ability to deal with failure? Simply put, the greatest way to fail is to place yourselves in situations where you will fail several times. Failure becomes far more manageable if you regard it as something that will help you improve in the future. It's impossible to live without failing at something, unless you live so cautiously that you might as well not have lived at all, in which case you have failed by default, said J.K. Rowling. We risk stagnation if we live too cautiously. Life stagnation can be far more unpleasant than failure. Far better is it to dare mighty things, to win glorious triumphs even though checkered by failure, than to rank with those poor spirits who neither enjoy nor suffer much, because they live in a gray twilight that knows not victory nor defeat, said Theodore Roosevelt. All of history's greatest artists and thinkers toiled and failed a lot. They learned that failure is part of the journey to success. The majority of their early works were labeled failures by critics and doubters, but by consistently churning out content, they eventually managed to create something excellent enough to inspire us all. We may learn from them by not being scared to take risks and fail our way to achievement. Failure found to be an essential prerequisite for success. Good ideas, hard effort, dedication, inspiration, tenacity, and maybe a little luck are the ingredients for success in every industry. Oh, and don't forget about failure, which Dashun Wang and his Northwestern University colleagues term the crucial prerequisite for success. In a new report based on an examination of 776,721 grant proposals submitted to the National Institutes of Health between 1985 and 2015. The researchers looked at 46 years of venture capital startup investments in their quest to develop a mathematical model that can accurately predict whether an endeavor would succeed or fail. They also put the model to the test on Wang's least conventional but still significant dataset, 170,350 terrorist events between 970 and 2017. What's the takeaway? Wang, Associate Professor of Management and Organizations at Northwestern's Kellogg School of Management, who conceptualized and supervised the study, said, "Every winner starts as a loser." But he says, not every failure leads to success, and persistence isn't what divides us winners from the losers according to the findings. One of the more surprising findings in the article, which was published this week in Nature, is that those who eventually succeeded and those who eventually failed tried to attain their goals roughly the same number of times. Turns out that failing and trying again only succeeds if you learn from your mistakes. The goal is to work wisely rather than hard. Rather than fumbling around and altering everything, Wang adds, you have to figure out what worked and what didn't, and then focus on what needs to be improved. Those who failed didn't have to work as hard as those who succeeded. They could have worked harder if they hadn't made so many useless modifications. Wang's team discovered previously undiscovered statistical characteristics that divide successful groups from non-successful groups and allow them to forecast eventual results as they investigated the mechanisms regulating the dynamics of failure and constructed their model. The duration between consecutive failed attempts, which should decrease significantly, is one such critical signal, along with keeping what works and focusing on what doesn't. To put it another way, the faster you fail, the higher your odds of succeeding, and the longer you wait between failures, the more likely you are to fail again. If someone has filed for a grant and has had 3 failures, Wang adds, we can forecast whether they will finally succeed or not by looking at the period between the failures. Wang describes the large NIH database as a graveyard full of human failures, but it turned out to be a researcher's dream come true. We know exactly when each primary investigator failed, and we know how severely they failed because we know the proposal scores. Wang continues, we also know when they finally succeeded after numerous failures and received their first award. An IPO or a high-value merger and acquisition were the hallmarks of startup process. Terrorist attacks that killed at least one person were categorized as successes, whereas assaults that did not result in death were classified as failures. For those who failed at least once before succeeding, the average number of failures was 2.03 for the NIH, 1.5 for startups, and 3.90 for terrorist groups. Wang and his colleagues were able to find a vital point common to each of the hundreds of thousands of projects they looked at, a fork in the road where one path goes to a progression zone and the other leads to a stagnation region by working with such large-scale data. Two individuals near the critical point may initially appear equal in their learning strategy or other traits, the report explains. But their outcomes following failures could differ drastically depending on which region they reside. According to Wang, this divergent pattern of performance gets worse with each new attempt, albeit in some situations it's clear which section a person is in as early as the second. The existence of the tipping point, according to Wang, contradicts traditional explanations for failure and success, such as luck or a person's work habits. What we're showing here is that even when there aren't such variations, you can still have extremely diverse results. He explains, what counts is how people fail, how they react to failure, and where their failures take them. Next stages, according to Yian Yin, the study's first author, include refining the model to quantify other human and organizational factors in addition to learning from past mistakes. Wang's model, which has been evaluated in 3 other domains, show potential as a tool in other areas, according to Albert Laszlo's Barabasi, director of Northeastern University Center for Complex Network Research and author of The Formula, The Universal Laws of Success. There have been innumerable studies on how people and products succeed, he explains. However, relatively little is known about the role of failure. Wang's work radically rewrites our understanding of success, demonstrating the critical role failure plays in it, and eventually providing a methodological and conceptual framework to place failure in the canon of success. Nobody has ever written a book about how to be the perfect person, and if they did, someone would undoubtedly see a mistake, exposing the whole thing as a ruse. Adults used to like playing the comparison game with me as a kid. Nicole, why can't you be a good girl like that? As a result, I've spent most of my life comparing myself to others and feeling inadequate. However, I eventually understood that the majority of parents and teachers engage in the comparison game with their children. As a result, we all feel the same way. That's most likely why social media exploded in popularity in the first place. All individuals do is flaunt their opulent lifestyles in order to feel less insignificant on the inside. As a result, you may believe that you are adequate. We witness their highlight reel when we look at successful people around us. No one ever asks them about their mistakes. They are solely interested in hearing about their victories. But what if you ask them to provide a list of their failures? They could pull it off. And, let's face it, we're all capable of it. It's also quite simple. However, even the most successful people today still fail. And if that weren't the case, the tabloids would be left with nothing to write about. Your greatest teacher is a failure. Knowing what doesn't work can teach you a lot about yourself, a concept, or anything you're working on. But for a moment, consider that mistakes aren't always failures. Even if anything you publish is highly criticized, it doesn't mean you're not on the correct route. Perhaps the example you gave is incorrect, and you will learn from your mistakes. However, you continue to make work toward a solution to the problem at hand. Failure is the result of giving up. Errors don't. Mistakes merely lead you along a different route, the correct one. Calling everything you undertake an experiment is one way to approach failure. Approach your ideas and efforts as if you were a scientist seeking the truth. You just pivot in a new direction if the findings of an experiment don't turn out as expected. You don't dwell on your failure. You simply shrug, admit that the hypothesis leads to an unacceptable conclusion, and continue in another direction. Instead than running away from failure, use this simpler strategy to learn from it. You're merely looking for the best option. You failed so many times in your life, but it's also caused you to develop so much. You probably don't remember this, but as a newborn, you would stumble around trying to walk. You must have fallen at least 100 times. You didn't believe in giving up when you were around 10 months old. You were well aware that you needed to learn to walk. As a result, you may go to places, get out of bed, get your hands on the cookies on the table. You knew that if you could walk, everything would be different. And now look at you. You go about your business completely forgetting that it was once a major issue for you. That's how far you progressed. Something you regularly fail at now will one day be so simple that you won't even notice. You'll have progressed so far that you'll forget how difficult things were at one point. Failure is simply evidence that you're doing something new. A new life challenge has presented itself, and doing something unusual forces you to grow in a new direction. It's incredible. Growing pains are unpleasant, especially when they are labeled as failures, but the end result is well worth the effort. Every hardship, challenge, and roadblock you face makes you a stronger and wiser person. That's it for this video, Manna member. Remember to subscribe to our channel, and if you feel like we've delivered value, please share this video with one person. That's right, just one person as a token of your appreciation for the hard work we put into making content that educates and helps you on your mission of building your own fortune. Remember, you can watch video after video, but it isn't until you actually take action that you'll start to see results. See you soon!